Northwest 337, cross runway 24 left, contact ground, 0.65.
Across the left side, 24 left, 0.65 northwest.
Every year, more and more aircraft take to the skies. It's not just the skies that are becoming more crowded, but the place most of us feel safest, the ground. As runways have become busier, so the chances of planes colliding on the ground have increased.
There is more likelihood of something happening on the ground than there is in the sky. And we've been quite fortunate, actually, that we've seen as few catastrophic events.
But when mistakes are made and two aircraft collide on a runway, the consequences are indeed catastrophic. "118 people died when a passenger jet ploughed into a light aircraft at Milan's Linate airport in October 2001. It was an accident that should never have happened.
In that morning in Linate, everything happened that should never happen in an airport. Everything. Negligence, incapability, misunderstandings, everything happened.
The story of crashes on the ground is one of warnings ignored time and time again. Milan's Linate airport is a familiar one to European travellers. It's long been used by many British airlines, including British Airways, British Midland and EasyJet. October the 8th, 2001 should have been a routine day, as passengers queued to check in for early morning flights around Europe. Some may have felt a little nervous, as it was less than a month after the terrorist attacks of September the 11th. But few would have doubted the safety standards of a modern international airport serving one of the major business capitals of Europe. Everything was on schedule as 104 passengers boarded the Scandinavian Airlines flight to Copenhagen. They included business people, a group of friends on their way to a go-kart championship, several families, and a couple of newlyweds who'd cancelled a holiday to Egypt for fear of a terrorist attack. Also preparing to leave that morning was a businessman looking forward to a test flight in the executive jet he was thinking of buying. In charge of their safety were Linate's air traffic controllers. It was their basic responsibility to make sure no two planes ever occupied the runway at the same time. As the two planes taxied toward the runway, everything seemed in order. Both captains had impeccable records. Both aircraft were in perfect condition. Yet none of the people on board either plane ever left the ground. At first, the world feared another terrorist attack.
Eyewitnesses have spoken of hearing a succession of loud bangs at the time of the impact, which happened first thing this morning.
100 people have been killed in a crash at one of northern Italy's major airports.
No reports so far of any survivors.
It's obvious that no one on the Scandinavian flight had a chance of survival. Rescue workers have been on the scene quickly, but they were only able to recover the bodies of the 110 passengers and crew. In all, 118 people had died, one of the worst air disasters in Italian history.
But it was not terrorism. The truth was far more simple. The two planes had collided on the ground.
Ancora ieri mi sembrava incredibile.
It seemed incredible to me that a thing like that could have happened at an airport like Linate. Two aircraft crashing into each other on the ground. Because when you think about an air accident, you always think about an accident happening in the sky.
But
on the ground, well, it seems almost impossible. But it did happen.
The technology to prevent runway crashes has been available to airports all over the world for years. The scandal of Linate is that it had never been installed. It should have been, for Milan bore extraordinary parallels with an accident that had occurred a quarter of a century earlier. This is the story of how the lives of 118 people could so easily have been saved, if the obvious lessons from previous runway crashes had been learned. The lesson began 26 years ago, on the Spanish holiday island of Tenerife, the site of the biggest aviation disaster the world has ever known. By the 1970s, Tenerife had become a popular holiday destination for tourists from all over the world. On the 27th of March 1977, 378 passengers were heading to the Canary Islands from the US to begin a cruise.
It was a lot of retired people, mostly retired people. They had come from, most of them, a retirement community on the West Coast. And they had been up all night. Of course, they were excited because they were going on holiday and picking up their cruise ship. But it was packed. Every seat was taken on a 747.
The plane's destination was not Tenerife, but Las Palmas, on the neighboring island of Gran Canaria. As it was about to land, it was told to divert to Tenerife because a terrorist bomb had gone off at Las Palmas. Many of the aircraft inbound for Las Palmas had been sent to Tenerife that morning, leading to chaos at the airport.
There had been a lot of airplanes that had landed there previously, just prior to us. And it was just complete havoc in respect of so many airplanes. The airport's just not prepared to handle that kind of traffic.
Stewardess Dorothy Kelly reassured the restless passengers as they waited for their plane to take off.
I think their main concern was that they might miss the cruise ship and it would leave without them. But I guess since there were so many of them, that in the end we convinced them that wasn't a problem.
During the afternoon, Las Palmas was reopened and Pan Am was given clearance to taxi onto the runway. It was told to follow a KLM 747, which was carrying 248 people. Pan Am's instructions from air traffic control were to then leave the runway via the third exit, so that the KLM 747 could take off. But as it was taxiing, a thick fog came down from the neighboring mountains and enveloped the airport.
So the visibility went from unlimited down to what we were told by the tower was 500 meters. So it deteriorated instantly. We could see the fog coming down.
With the runway now shrouded in fog, neither plane could see each other. Crucially, neither could the air traffic controller in the tower. The Pan Am pilots taxiing down the runway missed the third turning. The angle was too tight for their 747, and they assumed they had to turn at the following one. At 5 minutes, before receiving his proper clearance, the KLM pilot, believing the Pan Am was now off the runway, began his takeoff, with Pan Am still ahead of him.
First time in my life I've ever had a situation occur that I couldn't believe was happening. I just could not believe this airplane was coming down the runway at us. And my comment was, "Get off," to the captain, which he tried everything he possibly could. And as we were turning, I looked back out of my right window, and the KLM airplane had lifted off the runway. And basically what I did was just close my eyes and duck.
And then all of a sudden I just remember everything flying around in slow motion. And there was total silence. I couldn't hear anything. It was just deafening silence.
And then when I opened my eyes and looked up, all the windows were gone in the cockpit. I looked out to the right wing was on fire. I looked back to the left, there was no top to the cockpit, all that was gone.
It had been completely ripped off.
And I could see all the way to the tail of the airplane.
Just peeled off from cockpit all the way back down the aircraft, just like a sardine can peeling off the lid.
Bob Bragg and Dorothy Kelly managed to escape from the burning wreckage. They now had only one thing in mind: saving as many people as possible.
The important thing, of course, is to get everybody away from the aircraft. I could see one of the engines just spinning out of control at that point. And I knew it was going to blow up. And there were all these people close to the airplane, so I did run back and try to get as many people away as I could. And just shouting, screaming, get away, pulling as many people off as I could possibly get close to.
What I saw was the airplane burning. Basically, the right wing was burning. And these 50 people out on the wing. I knew the passengers weren't safe up on the wing, and that's the reason I told them to start, as loud as I could to jump off the wing.
Dorothy spotted the captain lying under the front nose of the plane.
He was lying down on the ground, and I said, "Come on, Captain, we have to get out of here. This engine's about to blow up." And he said, no, I want to stay here. It's so cool in the grass. And I said, no, we've got to get out of here. And he wouldn't budge. I said, are your legs broken? He didn't know. And so I just flipped him over and I grabbed him under the arms and started running backwards with him away from the aircraft. And as I was doing that, that engine did blow up.
When it exploded, the airplane collapsed. And it was just a pile of wreckage, and the only sound you could hear was the burning of the flame. No more screams, no more yelling. Within 5 to 10 minutes, you couldn't hear a thing, just utter silence.
Despite the efforts of Dorothy Kelly and Bob Bragg, only 61 people out of a total of 396 on board the Pan Am 747 survived.
I guess we just did as much as we could for any of the people that we could get to. And the worst part for me was just watching those people at the windows, banging on the windows and screaming, and seeing the fire all around. Most of those people unfortunately died there. They couldn't get out, or they were in shock and wouldn't move.
When you have a fire that is that strong and that big, it takes all the oxygen out of the surrounding air. And basically the passengers died from suffocation, most of them. But you have to remember also that the average age of the passenger was 69 years old. And I was not only told once, I was told a lot of times that the surviving passengers had heard people say, well, I guess this is it, and made no effort to get out of the airplane.
As well as the 335 deaths on the Pan Am plane, all 248 people on the KLM also perished. In total, 583 people lost their lives. To this day, Tenerife remains the worst aviation accident in history. The air traffic control tower, just 700 meters away, never even saw it happen. For the aviation industry, it was a wake-up call that the biggest danger of collision between two aircraft was not in the air, but on the ground.
Tenerife was certainly a worldwide focus on how could this have been prevented? What were the dynamics that set this up? And it, for the first time, made us look at the issue of preventing two aircraft from occupying an active runway at the same time.
There was a piece of technology then available that helped controllers see what was happening on the runway in fog. Ground radar. Planes showed up as blips on the screen, giving controllers an electronic view of the runway in low visibility. But Tenerife, like most airports, did not have ground radar. It was expensive, unreliable, and crucially gave controllers no warning if a potential collision was about to take place.
Brakes Fantas 016, notifica el listo F.
In the fjords of Norway, a small electronics company was trying to create a ground radar that did warn of potential collisions. Their concern was not how to stop planes colliding, but ships. The fjords regularly suffered from low visibility, and there was always a risk of collision in the crowded waterways. So a small group of local engineers began to work on a system that would reduce the risks of collisions at sea.
And it really started in our small town Horten, which was the main Navy base in Norway. It was a very maritime environment. Several young engineers that wanted to use the electronics for the maritime industry. And they succeeded. They installed and ran the world's first anti-collision system for ships.
What they came up with was a radar system that allowed vessel traffic controllers to track the ships that came in and out of the fjord, whatever the weather. Each ship was given a label, and the system warned the controllers whenever there was a danger of collision. The Norwegians noticed a clear similarity between their maritime environment and that of air traffic control.
We thought it must be a way we could use this technology also for air traffic control. We had an anti-collision system that gave you warnings if there was something we thought could be a dangerous situation. And that wasn't very much used in air traffic control. It was the controller's mind who did this. It was not any techniques or any computers that did much of such similar calculations. So we thought, why not introduce that to air traffic control to see if we could help the controllers in their work.
Tor Magnus took the system and showed it to air traffic controllers around the world.
We had the nice modern TV type screens, color, and we thought this was good. I mean, we demonstrated to air traffic controllers, said, I mean, this is the future, this is what you need. Nobody wanted it. It's so no advantage at all. I mean, you use colors, what do you need colors for? Well, you know, most of us are engineers of background, and we think, of course, that we have these super ideas, the best ideas in the world, and when we present that to controllers, we think that, well, I mean, why don't you accept that this is a good idea? Why can't you just accept this, what we are saying? It looks like we're more advanced in the maritime industry than in air traffic control.
No one had to buy it. There were no international regulations then or now that insisted on airports having ground radar.
5 8 Fox shot position at hold. 5 right at Fox shot position. Air Wisconsin 912 traffic 11. 25 Red American 1803.
Without sophisticated radar systems, problems on runways continued. The result was an increase in the number of what are known as runway incursions, when a plane or other vehicle strays onto an active runway in use for takeoff or landing. Sheer luck meant few had led to any accidents, but a catastrophe was always possible.
The rates of incidents increased because we had a dramatic increase in traffic. And the odds are going to tell you that when you increase your risk exposure when you have more takeoffs and more landings, when there's more density on the runway surface, your risk exposure is greater. All of us know when the incidents start rising that ultimately you're going to have an accident.
On the 3rd of December 1990, the inevitable happened.
Crash investigators are at Detroit's Metro Airport this morning, where two Northwest Airlines passenger planes collided on the ground yesterday while taxiing for takeoff. The DC-9's engine burst into flames and ignited a rain of fire through the cabin, where 39 passengers and crew tried desperately to escape. There's speculation that heavy fog and only 800 feet of ground visibility contributed to the crash. An air traffic control expert says the DC-9 pilot was disoriented and wandered near the path of the 727. The Transportation Safety Board wants to know why both jetliners were on the same runway at the same time.
Runway, wind 150 quarter, 125 right, quick land. Take off, United 1420.
2 months later, at Los Angeles International Airport, there was another collision on the runway. There was no fog this time, but it was nighttime, with the lights causing confusion. A Boeing 737 landed on another jet that was preparing to take off. 34 people lost their lives. Something had to be done.
It was probably the most dramatic runway incursion in the United States at the time. There had been other global ones, that certainly Tenerife being the watershed. But yes, it was significant, and in my view, probably cast a brighter light on runway incursions in the United States than had heretofore been cast. Both in terms of how do we solve this from a human standpoint, but let's really start looking at technology as part of the solution.
In America, the Federal Aviation Authority, the FAA, stepped up a program to invest in ground radar at major airports. Los Angeles and Detroit had shown how easy it was for humans to make mistakes. Technology was seen as key to the solution.
It's a safety net, because we're never going to find human beings that at some point don't assess correctly, that don't make the right instantaneous decision, that don't see everything that's happened on the runway, or don't remember all of the complex details that they have to remember, or misinterpret an instruction that they've given or heard. And so technology really becomes the safety net that prevents the accident.
In Europe, there was also a push for more technology on runways, and a newfound interest in the Norwegian ground radar system. In fact, Milan Linate was one of the first airports to show an interest. Lying at the foot of the Alps, it had a particular problem with fog. For an average of 4 months a year, visibility was dangerously low. The airport already had a ground radar, but it was of the old-fashioned variety, which gave controllers no warnings about potential collisions. So a group of Linate air traffic controllers went to Norway to look at the latest ground radar technology.
I saw it in operation in Oslo. The most important thing in my view was that it gave me a warning when there was a possible intrusion on a runway. The system itself checked that the runway was free, that all the parking areas were free, and the system itself sent the controller an alarm if any aeroplane or form of transport had wrongly got onto the runway. And in my view, this system was one of the best systems around.
In 1994, Linate bought the state-of-the-art Norwegian radar system, becoming one of their first customers. But the controllers continued to use the old, unsophisticated radar. Their brand new Norwegian system was not actually installed. It sat in a box at the airport.
We ran through the project with them. We did, as we do every time, we do an acceptance test in our factory. And then we had some delay, unfortunately, at that time, so that it wasn't installed immediately. So it's only a few years later when it was decided to have it installed. It's unfortunate, and well, it's something that we really don't know what happened there. But they had an existing radar, you know, so it wasn't really a hurry at that time. So, yeah.
In failing to install the new radar, the Italian authorities cited technical reasons. The man who is to investigate the accident 7 years later suspects this was not the whole story.
I'm sure that the Italians were capable of installing the radar had they wished to. A ground radar is not a significantly difficult thing to install. It may take time, effort and money, but it really is not that difficult to install. So technically there are no reasons why it shouldn't have been installed. Certainly the vendors would not have been paid for delivering something which was not going to work, but the systems were just left.
Newcastle was another airport that bought the Norwegian system. Unlike Linate, they had no such technical problems installing it. For an airport that was expanding rapidly in the 1990s, the ground radar was seen as an essential safety tool.
When we're foggy, it's invaluable here because we can see where aircraft are when it's like a wall of white paint in front of the tower. We can see where the aircraft are on the airfield. I'm not using it very much at this particular moment because I'm doing most of it by looking out the window because I can see it. So. But yeah, the system overall is quite an asset. It's a very important safety feature. It's useful in fog because I can't see as much in fog, and it acts as my eyes out on the airfield further beyond where I can see. It's an essential safety aid when it's in fog, when in limited visibility in fog, because we could be down to literally 200 metres, which means that I can't see that British Airways aircraft over there on the stand. And it's a bit like when you're working in a darkened room with a blindfold on, and now we're working in a darkened room and the blindfold's half up and we've got a torch now, so we can see a lot more.
Newcastle's system cost £500,000, a fraction of their annual turnover. It included the alarm system that warns controllers of potential collisions on the runway.
Well, the alarm system, it's actually got an audible alarm, and whilst you can see that normally the labels are in green or yellow as they move around here, the alarm system, this makes a beep, 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 beep noise, a bit like your alarm in the morning, so it's good for waking you up. And it grabs your attention, and then you can see the labels, what the radar, the confliction will actually show up in red. The two labels of the two things will show up in red. And it doesn't actually just wait for the aircraft to get on the runway before it gives you an alert. It'll give you an alert if there's an aircraft within a mile and a half on final, and there's another one on the runway. The alert system will go off again, and you'll get the flashing red, and you'll get the flashing here and the noise. There we go. You've got 5 on Alpha Bravo. You clear takeoff runway 07, so it's been 150 degrees, 10 knots.
Newcastle's experience showed just how valuable a sophisticated collision alert system was. Yet Milan's Linate airport continued to use their old, outdated system year after year. Until, in 1999, it broke down completely. But instead of now installing the state-of-the-art Norwegian system they bought back in 1994, Milan's controllers had to work with no ground radar at all.
The radar system had been physically dismantled, removed and thrown away on a tip. So Linate Airport, one of the most at-risk airports in the world due to fog, had not been fitted with radar for a long time.
It was no secret to the authorities that Linate was now working without ground radar.
This was obviously known by all the people responsible for managing the airport. It was known by the flight controllers. It was known by the regional manager of airports in Italy. It was known particularly by those responsible for safety in Rome.
In the absence of any ground radar, air traffic controllers at Linate relied on pilots to tell them where they were when there was fog. But there was another problem. The signs and lights that tell pilots where they are were of very poor quality.
Taxiing around Linate is a little difficult in fog due to some of the lighting not being standard and difficult to interpret. You hear the odd comment from pilots that have not been there so often that, oh, the runway markings are a little difficult to see and the taxiway markings aren't so clear. It gave a bit of an impression of being a little bit run down. Wasn't in particularly good shape.
16 heavy, wind 23011, runway 25 right, clear for takeoff. Clear for takeoff, United 16 heavy.
Events in the rest of the world should have warned Linate just how dangerous runways were becoming.
6,000 Los Angeles turn,
Runway incursions were continuing to increase.
wind 2408, runway
In the
25
US,
left, clear to land.
the rate of incidents in the 90s was increasing by nearly 5% a year as traffic levels went up. The FAA, the body responsible for airports, did have a program to install ground radar. Reluctant to buy a Norwegian system, they decided to develop their own American one, which led to years of delay.
After we made the recommendation, we continued to communicate with the FAA, encourage them to persist in developing this. We checked up on their progress. They were reporting back at various points that it's almost done, it's almost done, it's almost done. It turned out it took another 8 years till they really got it fielded.
The problem was underlined by a run of dramatic near misses. The closest occurred in 1999 at Chicago O'Hare, when a Korean Air 747, with more than 360 people on board, missed an Air China 747 by just 80 feet. The air traffic controller screamed out, but was powerless to prevent a near collision.
Stop! The Korean air pilot lifted off earlier than he would have liked to in order to avoid the collision, and actually had to turn a little bit to lift the wing over the other aircraft. I mean, we would have had two 747s get together on the runway, which is exactly what Tenerife was. The only difference on this one is that the Air China aircraft was a cargo flight and there were only 4 people on board. But it could have been every bit as serious a collision as Tenerife. And here we are 25 years later and we still got the same problem.
On October the 31st, 2000, there was a runway accident at Taipei in Taiwan, another airport with no ground radar. A hurricane had caused low visibility, leading to the pilot getting lost and trying to take off from the wrong runway. 83 people were killed. And at Milan in 2001, Linate Air Traffic Control was still operating without ground radar. Its old system was on a tip, and its sophisticated new Norwegian system, bought in 1994 to provide a vital safety net in fog, had still not been installed. After 7 years, the new radar was still in its box. But on the morning of October the 8th, 2001, none of the passengers checking in for the Copenhagen flight would have been worrying about ground radar. For it was less than a month after the hijackings of September the 11th. Natalie Mikalev was one of the passengers. Although from London, she lived in Italy with her boyfriend, Stefano Bo.
I remember that we'd actually talked about the trip she had to make the following day. I had asked her if she was afraid to make the journey. She told me absolutely not, because, in her opinion, that journey from Milan to Denmark was certainly not a dangerous one. And so from a terrorist point of view, she wasn't in the least bit worried.
Lorenzo Pettinaroli, a fashion executive, was also flying to Copenhagen on business.
He didn't want to leave. The night before he was saying to his wife, I don't feel like going, I don't feel like going, I don't know, it never happened to me before, but I would like to stay here. And his wife, Celia, said to him, go, it's your business, go, don't worry, it's still another week or 2 weeks, and then we will be together again.
That morning, as on so many other mornings, Linate was shrouded in fog.
It was a typical Linate's fog. Very dense, very thick. You don't see much. You just see milk. It's just like milk. It's just like driving in a glass of milk. I mean, we have many levels of visibility, and that day was the minimum level.
Pilots flying in and out of Linate knew there was no ground radar, but they lived with it.
Often we pay a lot of attention, we are very careful on the first day this device is not working. Then once it's not working for weeks or months or even years, we are not so careful. I mean, we get used to it. We all know, and we do without. We fly without.
The air traffic controllers who worked the tower also lived without it.
686.
It was the ground controller's responsibility to taxi planes to and from their stands to the runway. Unable to see out of the tower due to the thick fog, he relied on pilots to look out of their windows and tell him where they were. Preparing to taxi that morning was a Citation business jet. The pilots had flown in to show the plane to a prospective customer, an Italian businessman. They planned to fly him to Paris to show the plane in action. Also present was a sales rep for the plane manufacturers. What follows are the exact words spoken by the ground controller and the Citation pilot. Without the safety net of ground radar, the clarity and accuracy of communication was crucial to taxi planes safely around the airport. A series of mistakes and misunderstandings would lead to disaster. At 8:05 a.m., the pilot requested his taxi instructions to direct him to the runway.
Buongiorno. Delta India Echo Victor X-ray, General Aviation for taxi.
Delta Victor X-ray, taxi north via Romeo 5, QNH 1013. Call me back at the stop bar of the main runway extension.
Roger, via Romeo
5 and 1013, and call you back before reaching the main runway.
The pilot's instructions were to taxi north along Romeo 5 to this area, and then to call back the ground controller. The controller's plan was that he should then taxi along the main taxiway towards the main runway for takeoff.
5 Alpha, RLS 8.
This apparently simple communication contained the first crucial error.
The first main taxi instruction to the CJ2, the Citation jet, was to taxi north via Romeo 5, which is a reasonably standard instruction. Unfortunately, it's not the same instruction as the pilot has in his instructions that are written down for him. So a pilot has a book of instructions which tell him how to operate at that particular airport if he hasn't been before, and the book actually tells him he's not to taxi north via Romeo 5, but is in fact to go down Romeo 6, which is where in fact he ended up going.
The discrepancy between what was written in the book and air traffic procedure was down to human error. It was not the only mistake in that first communication. The controller had said,
Taxi north via Romeo 5, QNH 1013. Call me back at the stop bar of the main runway extension.
The pilot repeated back incorrectly,
013, and call you back before reaching the main runway.
The controller instructed the pilot to call him back at the runway extension. The pilot replied he would call back at the main runway. The pilot seems to have misunderstood his instructions. But the controller does not pick up on the mistake as he is supposed to do.
This communication is the first indication that we have a difference in the plans. The controller plans for the aircraft to go north, whereas the pilot is probably planning to go south via Romeo 6 in accordance with his basic instructions. It's the first opportunity you have to catch the errors in the system that happened that day.
So the Citation began to taxi away from the parking area. He followed the yellow lines on the taxiway. He then reached a point where the yellow line divides in two, and he could go in two directions. Taxiway Romeo 5, where he's been told to go, and Romeo 6, towards the main runway.
Those signs were not of the appropriate size, with the right background, or indeed were terribly clear. The 5 and the 6 were very, very similar, not in accordance with the international standards.
The pilot took the wrong taxiway, going down Romeo 6 rather than Romeo 5. In the meantime, the Scandinavian Airlines MD-87, carrying 104 passengers, was heading for the same runway to prepare for takeoff. With no ground radar and no visibility through the tower window, the ground controller had no way of knowing the citation had taken the wrong turn.
It is certain that if the radar had been there, unless the flight controllers that day had gone to play tennis instead of remaining in the control tower, it is certain that if the flight controllers were looking at the radar screen, they would have seen the signals given by two aeroplanes in motion and would have prevented the accident.
The Citation was now heading for the main runway, where the Scandinavian jet was preparing to take off. He reached a holding point, Sierra 4, marked on the airport surface. The pilot called into the ground controller to tell him where he was. It was the final opportunity for the controller to realize the Citation was not where he thought it was. The final chance he had to avert the disaster.
Delta India Echo Victor X-ray is approaching Sierra 4.
Delta India Echo Victor X-ray, confirm your position.
Approaching the runway, Sierra 4.
Delta Victor X-ray, roger. Maintain the stop bar, I'll call you back.
The interchange is interesting because the controller doesn't appear to know where Sierra 4 is, or at least begins a significant questioning process as to, is that really where you are?
Delta India Echo Victor X-ray, confirm your position.
And the pilot confirms once again that he's at Sierra 4.
Approaching the runway, Sierra 4.
The Sierra 4 incident is actually very significant. We now have the aeroplane definitely heading towards the middle of the runway to cross, and the whole disaster could have been averted at this point by the controller detecting the mistake in the plans of the system. However, it wasn't done so.
44 seconds later, the controller instructed the Citation to go on, inadvertently directing him onto the main runway, where the Scandinavian was waiting to take off. Without ground radar, the controller was completely unaware of what he was doing.
Delta Victor X-ray, continue your taxi on the main apron, follow the Alpha line.
Roger. Continue the taxi in main Alpha line. The Delta Victor X-ray.
Is correct, and please call me back entering the main taxiway.
I'll call you on the main taxiway.
At this exact moment, the Scandinavian received clearance for takeoff.
Break. Scandinavian 686, Linate, clear for takeoff. 36.
Correct, and please call me back entering the main taxiway.
As the Citation drifted toward the runway, the Scandinavian was beginning its takeoff run. Traveling at 72 meters per second in dense fog, he would have seen the Citation for less than a second. The Scandinavian plane managed to take off, but hit the Cessna as he did so. The Cessna blew up on impact, killing all 4 occupants. The damaged Scandinavian jet then crashed into the baggage hall, killing all 110 people on board and 4 ground staff. Jean-Paul Nanut had just landed his Alitalia jet when he heard an explosion.
We ran to the site, and when I was like 50 meters from the building, the aircraft, the wreckage, I could see flames and fires. The aircraft was lying on one side. It was like unreal. It was very silent. There were no noise, and it was very cold. We could see the cockpit. We were hoping that maybe to see something moving inside, from the inside. But they were all gone. I mean, they were all dead.
Ground staff came streaming out of the baggage hall where the Scandinavian jet had crashed.
One employee came out. He was in fire. He was on fire. He was torching. He just came out of the fog, and he was yelling. He was screaming, and then just we had doctors and nurse that jumped on him and they took him away.
Coming less than a month after September the 11th, initial reports raised fears of a terrorist attack.
When I heard the radio, they were starting to break the news. At the beginning, they didn't say it was an accident. They were talking about a bomb at Linate Airport, which made me prick up my ears and say, "What? Linate?"
But I wasn't sure on which flight he was. If he was on the Copenhagen one, I wasn't sure if it was a Stockholm flight. So I tried to call, but nobody would give me any information. All the information were forbidden to be given.
Stefano drove straight to Linate as soon as he heard the news about the crash.
You started hearing the strangest conversations. There were those who were saying that the people sitting on the left of the plane had been saved. Others that it was those on the right. Some said those at the front had been saved, and others again said it was those at the back. People were crying, desperate. There was total confusion, and no one was telling us anything. After an hour and a half or 2 hours, they told us that no one had been saved from that flight.
Little by little, as long as while time went on, I realized that he was on that flight, and I kept on calling him on his mobile, on the English mobile, on the Italian mobile, and the answer was always the same. The number you dialed is not available at the moment. Please call again. And that was the worst moment in my life. I realized that he was not with us anymore.
News of the accident quickly reached staff at Park Air Systems in Norway. Thoughts inevitably turned to the ground radar system they'd sold Linate back in 1994, but which the airport had failed to install.
When you have an accident, everybody thinks it was, what a shame it wasn't installed. But, I mean, you can't change that, so... We thought as everybody else, why did it happen at this time? Why wasn't the life such that we had installed it earlier? It was a difficult time for all of us, of course. Most people would have thought that had they had the system there operationally, the accident would probably not have happened. So you feel, powerless somehow.
For 7 years, airport and air traffic control authorities had cited technical reasons for failing to install the ground radar at Linate. Yet a few hours after the accident, Tor Magnus received a phone call. Could they now please install the radar?
We were immediately contacted and asked, what can we do? What can we do quickly now? So that, what's the best way of get the system installed immediately? Everything went very quickly after that. Of course it did. Everybody was eager to have a system installed immediately. So all planning, everything went quickly at that time. So we had it installed before Christmas that year.
With 118 people now dead, 7 years of technical reasons had disappeared overnight.
To me, it's more than enough to know that the radar was ordered or bought, was in a box, was there for so many years, nothing happened, and after the accident was there in a month. So that means that there were not technical reason for that, and was or negligence or something else more serious. But the result is always the same.
Today, Milan's tower has its Norwegian ground radar. 2 years on, and there has still not been an official explanation as to why it took so long to install. 11 people currently face trial in Italy for negligent manslaughter. They range from those responsible for maintenance at the airport to the former head of Italy's air traffic services. The ground controller on the day is also awaiting trial.
All those who have been accused of gross negligence knew that sooner or later these poor safety conditions and lack of compliance with international flight safety regulations would result sooner or later in a serious accident, as indeed did happen.
Avrebbero dovuto prima o poi portare a un grave incidente come poi si è verificato.
In Linate, there was not the ground radar. And this is the reason why this happened. It's no good to say it was not obliged, the airport was not obliged to have a ground radar. They might not have been obliged, but if the ground radar was there, they would have seen that there were two planes that were moving on the same moment, and they would have stopped.
Milan is not alone in having problems with runway incursions. The US has had a program to reduce them for over a decade. They have installed ground radar at major airports, but the technology has proved less reliable than the Norwegian system. And ever-increasing traffic levels mean runway incursions have continued to rise. Last year, there were 336 incidents at American airports.
It's been slow, I have to say. We've been slow to agree on solutions. We've been slow to accept a common system, a commonality of equipment. And frankly, we've been slow in deploying, probably globally.
There is a lot of difficulty in implementing some of these things, but the improvements have definitely been slow in coming. And you hate to see the same incidents happening, same circumstances leading to these accidents and incidents over and over again, yes.
But as long as traffic levels remain high, the potential for a catastrophic event will always remain unless we get to the point where we've got reliable, affordable technology. And I think both of those are key.
In Britain, most major international airports do have ground radar. But although it's a useful safety feature, it's not fail-safe. Commercial pressures mean mistakes can still be made. Last year there were 39 reported runway incursions in the UK, of varying degrees of seriousness.
The capacity increase at airports is a very big issue for the operators and for the airports now. Well, they're trying to get as much utilisation off the runways and onto the runways as they can. So of course there's a lot of pressure on the crews of the aircraft to get on the runway and off the runways quickly. The airfields themselves have become more expanded, more complicated, and the two factors come together, probably causing a rise in runway incursions.
A number of UK airports which are equipped for takeoff and landing in the lowest permissible level of visibility have no ground radar to help taxi planes once they're on the ground. Glasgow, Leeds, Bradford and Bristol are all such airports. They do all have approved procedures to deal with taxiing in low visibility, but many pilots believe they should still have ground radar.
In our opinion, at the Pilots Association, obviously ground movement radar is a great advantage and something we would expect at all airports operating low visibility procedures if possible.
My feeling, my personal feeling, is that any airport that's going to handle international traffic that can show that it's been closed over so many days a year, it should be mandatory that they have ground radar.
The world first woke up to the danger of runway collisions through the disaster at Tenerife. Nobody imagined that an almost identical disaster could have happened again in modern-day Europe.
It was just same background as Tenerife and 25 years later, and it seemed like nothing had been learned. Having experienced what I did, being at the aircraft site, seeing airplanes actually blow up, burn, people dying horribly and unnecessarily, it just brings it home and makes you really angry And so when I hear about another incident where somebody could have done something, and for instance, in the case of Milan, where they had the system and didn't even install it, I just find it so unethical. And that's what bothers me, the lack of ethics, that people will sacrifice lives when it's not necessary, when there is something that can be done about it.
In the shadow of Milan's Linate airport is a memorial to the latest victims of runway collisions.
Lorenzo. It's a beautiful place, beautiful. Plenty of peace. The name of this place, Bosco dei Faggi, 118 trees for never to forget. 8 October 2001. And they are here near their place with the aeroplane that flies over them, and they keep them company. But at least they are all together. Here is nice because they are all together. This is our Bosco dei Faggi. Il Bosco dei Faggi. 118 trees for not to forget what happened on the 8th of October 2001. And this should be an example for the rest of the world. This thing must not be forgotten.